This is Tommy's Outdoors 98. Today we're going to talk about the difficult topic of animal poaching and animal trafficking, especially when it comes to high-value animals. High value not only from the conservation standpoint, but economically. Like rhino, for example, where pound for pound rhino horn is more expensive than gold. So especially when it comes to those animals, problem is severe. We essentially dealing here with militarized, highly trained gangs and cartels of organized criminals who are conducting those actions, conducting these poaching acts, and obviously it is incredibly unfortunate and problematic not only for conservation efforts but also for local communities, for people who live there, and they're being kind of caught in this military-like conflict. So this is a difficult subject, and we already talked about it on a few previous episodes of the podcast. But today we're gonna focus on that, as our guest is Nathan Edmondson, who is president and co-founder of EcoDefense Group. EcoDefense Group is like special ops for prevention of animal poaching. EcoDefense, they are providing training and consultation for local rangers who are at the forefront of this war. I'm not afraid to use that word. And they're trying to help them and assist them and help not only local communities, but also help protection and conservation of those species. Interesting subject. I hope to do more episodes in the future discussing various aspects of it. But for now, I am really pleased to be able to bring you that conversation. Please leave the comments on the podcast or on the website, tommysoutdoors.com, or on social media, anywhere, really engage. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about this problem. And as always, if you like this episode, hit the like button, rate it. 5-star ratings are always appreciated. Leave the comment. And most of all, if you want to help what I do here, share that episode. Share it with your friends or with anyone who you think might be interested in this subject. And that's it for the introduction. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, Nathan Edmondson and EcoDefense Group. Nathan, welcome to the show. It feels like we have a pretty difficult and heavy subject at our hands today.
Yeah, I'd say so. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Listen, just to set up the scene, can you hit us with a few numbers, few stats? How the poaching situation looks like at the moment in terms of numbers, in terms of if it grows, and to some extent how bad is the situation?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can give a few numbers. I'm not the best with as recalling the statistics accurately, so bear with me if I'm a little off, but I can certainly tell the narrative. There were a number of reports that came out last year from major news outlets about the decline in poaching in 2020, specifically rhino poaching. I think most of us kind of knew that those were false numbers, right? That when it's shut down and literally nobody can be on the road in some of these countries, poaching is just going to drop naturally. We don't have the trafficking pipelines open because commercial travel and some other things are restricted. So what we're seeing now is a surge, definitely a surge in rhino poaching. Yeah, I mean, some of the parks, part of what you deal with is some of the parks, many of the parks don't disclose their poaching numbers and they don't disclose their population numbers. There are a couple of reasons for that. So sometimes getting accurate numbers and statistics can be can be a little bit misleading. I think in South Africa last year, there were about 400 rhino poached, which is a significant decline. But obviously that's based on, like I just said, unique circumstances. And I think this year we're on par to break that number pretty quickly. I'm not sure exactly where we are as of today, but I can tell you in one area where we were about a month ago, there were 15 rhino poached in just a couple of days. Those trends have continued. There's been some estimation too that in areas where you're measuring some statistical decline, that it's because there are fewer rhinos to poach. They're harder to find, harder to get. So you're still decimating the population, even if you don't see the numbers. And that's a really difficult and unfortunate thing to kind of accept and understand. And you also have to talk different countries, and also if you think about the rhino is the umbrella species, so there's certain areas. So obviously, you asked me a very simple question, but the answer isn't quite so simple. I think in last decade were 4,000 rhino lost. I'm looking at a couple things right now. 2019 to 2008 were 12,000 rhino, that's in South African national parks only. So you're looking at 16,000 rhino decade before. I think when the rhino war started in about 2006, you saw something around in Kruger National Park, you saw numbers that started, they went from about 50 to 100 to 600, 700, 800. And then you saw some, I hate to say the word stabilization, but you saw some then as the war, began to be, as there was a defense to the rhino, you saw some stabilization of those numbers. But I think what we're seeing right now, so far this year, the trend is eclipsing last year. And I think it'll go on to radically and dramatically eclipse those numbers. And many of the parks are facing as much as an 80% budget cut. So their ability to resist the surge, which is based on pent up demand, right? The demand is higher than it would have been should there not have been a pandemic, right? That surge demand is met with much lower resources. So you're looking at, before the pandemic, you're looking at an average of 3 to 4 rhino poached a day. I would wager that by the end of this year, we'd see that's 5 to 7 a day, and that's South Africa only. Other places will see sort of varying degrees in those numbers. And of course, those are only the rhino numbers. We're seeing lion, elephant, pangolin, everything's targeted right now. There's demand for all of it.
Yeah. So that was actually something that I think I already mentioned. It was on the podcast that the COVID pandemic was, like you said, on one hand, artificially kind of seeing the decline in numbers of poached animals. And there were some voices that, we don't know whether there really is decline because they can still be poached and stashed. And the moment they transfer routes were open, then they, the horns or whatever ivory will be shipped where it's supposed to be. But the other thing is, like you said, decline in funding with tourism being essentially dead, no photo tourism, no hunters coming on. The financial part of that suffered, and this is what you confirm right now. So this is not a new problem, right? The poaching of these animals. Is there anything you see over time or right now that is changing in terms of how organized those poachers are? And because where I'm getting at is that the picture is quite complex, because on one hand you might have local villagers who are basically suffering through the economic situation. On the other hand, you have, as far as I can tell, organized cartels, which are essentially organized crime. How is it trending? Is it changing right now?
I don't know about changing. I mean, if maybe we'll see later in the year. I mean, there may be the introduction of some new threats, but I do think it's important to differentiate. That there are different kinds of poaching. There is sort of the bushmeat. Well, let's say there's poaching based on need, right? Starvation, poverty. There's poaching based on opportunity. It's not highly organized. It's not targeted, but based on proximity. There can be incursions and poaching or snares and traps and different areas. Then you have sort of the locally recruited syndicates will come in and recruit locally. Different groups or individuals to go in and poach, and then you have like professional mercenary type hunters, or poachers rather, poachers who have experience, are essentially mercenaries like you'd see in any other regard, freelancers. You see some of that. Some of them may even have military experience or some other kind of advanced experience that that becomes obvious as they are able to evade more advanced ranger tactics or tracking or things like that they have more than just bush tracking skills. And then of course in certain areas, South Sudan, Congo, areas in Kenya, you have full-on militias who are organized, well-armed, extremely threatening, and responsible for serious armed conflict. And we like there historically and potentially currently there are other circumstances of terror groups profiting from wildlife trafficking, trafficking of wildlife parts. Coney, obviously, there's the famous tracking of the ivory to Coney's operations. And I think right now, I don't know that there's a lot of evidence for it, but I would say there's some rumors, some considerations of this new ISIS group in northern Mozambique and the threat they could pose. And if you think about it, proximity to an area with, for example, rhino, it's it's like being near gold. It's an opportunity to fund your operations. So I think we have to be extremely wary of that dynamic, playing out as it has in the past. But the lines can sometimes be very blurry. I mean, the Southeast Asian syndicates, they are clever in organizing middlemen and recruiting people who are locals who are expendable, right? And to give them several layers of detachment from the actual crime. So sometimes the organization, there's stories where, rangers will, or anti-poaching units will advance a certain tactic or behavior in one area, and then you see across the country an acclamation to that tactic. So there's clearly a widespread coordination, sharing of information, or backing by the same sort of parent syndicate, and it can be very difficult to know where the lines are. And then real intelligence operations are always underway to try and and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service participates with governments in Africa, for example, in trying to penetrate the pipeline once the traffic parts have left their points of origin. So again, it is exactly what you said. It's very complicated. It's difficult to anticipate. You'll see certain behaviors in certain areas, in South Africa, in neighboring countries, you do see kind of the dynamics of groups of three, one who shoots, one who cuts, one who carries, and they have kind of a well-organized and rehearsed, if you will. And sometimes, they have a lot of experience, a lot of time in the bush, going after multiple animals. Sometimes over the course of years, sometimes they've been caught and, are caught again. But you'll see kind of a rehearsed teamwork, for lack of a better word. And, they're organized, they're efficient. And that can be very difficult, especially when you have a vast area to cover with very little resources. And to your point, by the way, about the the rhino numbers being difficult. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, you like there are practices right now where poachers will poison carcasses and do other things specifically to kill vultures, because vultures can help. They'll help signal where the carcass is, and rangers, air units can identify where it is based on seeing vultures. Obviously, that's a reactive, but most counter poaching or a great deal of it is reactive. But so the poachers will actively try to kill the vultures, because the vultures will signal in their 2-day track, that the rangers may be able to identify and get on it. Similarly, they have practices of using suppressors, using tranquilizers. Now it's becoming, I think, more common. I've gotten some messages about that, that they'll use tranquilizers, because the sound of a shot obviously can give away the location of a poaching incident. And then you see use of like a panga, like a machete, and axes to sever the spine of a rhino if it hasn't been killed, to avoid firing a second shot, or if they have the opportunity. All of these are an attempt to disguise, and conceal the act of the poaching. How many carcasses are undiscovered, I don't know. But I also know that one of the things that can skew statistics is that calves will stay with the cow for 3 to 4 years. And if the cow is killed, there's a likelihood that calf will escape temporarily. You do have situations where they'll stay with the mother until she's rotting out, being eaten by hyena, just because it still smells like mom, and the calf doesn't know better. But the point is, it's impossible to determine how many young calves have been lost when a cow is poached, right? So they wander off in the bush, get dragged away by lion, or they shot later by poachers. That carcass is a lot harder to find and can be decimated.
Yeah. So the picture that you're painting here is really not fun, and it's really bad. So maybe now it's a good moment to introduce EcoDefense Group. So can you tell us what you guys do and how the group was founded? Like where the idea came from, like how it came to be?
Right. So I'll start with a bit of a disclaimer. We said on our site that the nature of our group is that a lot of things we either can't describe, can't disclose, or we have to do so in fairly vague terms. So if just be prepared for some of that. I like to say that we were founded out of need, not out of purpose. The difference is nobody involved, including myself, woke up kind of aware of the situation and said, how do we go over and help? I certainly did not anticipate that my life would be devoted to this cause. We were founded because there was a unique brokering of U.S. special operations individuals to solve a need on the front lines of the Rhino War. I heard about this, and the level of capabilities that were being introduced, it was something completely unique. I knew enough about the units, the special missions units that that these guys had a background, that were these guys' backgrounds, to know that this level of capability had not been introduced to wildlife conservation before, certainly not in this way. So as we saw the efficacy of that, that consultation, problem solving, going and delivering a new capability to a great need, and seeing how that could offer an asymmetric capability to rangers, we realized that we had an opportunity to do this, moving forward, and by forming an organization around it. And so that's what we did. We are on one hand a consultancy. We don't have a one size fits all approach to anywhere that we go. We go in, we do an assessment to an area. It's a very careful analysis, very thorough. And then we see, in this analysis, what can we solve? What is it that we can do to improve the situation and the capabilities? And that may be, maybe a very narrow lane for us, but we're very careful. We take on projects in 3 criteria. The criteria 1 is are we invited? Are we asked? We're not a security contractor. We're not interested in going out and brokering our talents and skills where we're not needed, and so where we're asked and where we're needed. The criteria 2 is this something that we can do that no one else can do? They're excellent performers on the ground. One I was speaking to this week, lead ranger up in Kenya. Actually, they're regional, based in Kenya. They're an awesome group that has an awesome train the trainer program, which is something we're engaged in too. Rangers have a lot of native capabilities, right? That are part of their SOPs and part of their talents and their groups and teams. So we want to say, is this something that we have to offer, really? And is it something that they can't be gotten, frankly, cheaper? Us activating our machine, going over and doing things is a serious commitment for us, for our donors, and we see a project all the way through. And the third criteria is, does it fit within our organization and our growth? We aim to be very lean. We take on projects that allow us to continue to be efficient and allow us to have a full execution to an end state of that program. So, there's a danger sometimes with wanting to do everything, because everywhere you go, there's a need. Part of that is, and part of our nature is that we partnered with a group called the By Grace Foundation. And what they do is community development for women and girls, employment programs through textile centers, commercial opportunities. So we were engaged in some community projects, and now we focus on what we do best, and we invite them alongside us where there's an opportunity for them to benefit community, because we do believe that that's vital, to solving any problem. So we were formed out of that need. Our goal is always to achieve asymmetry and make a difference in surgical, strategic fashion.
So I presume that you have a military background yourself, I would guess.
I do not. No.
Oh, you do
I
not?
just am in the business of hiring and managing.
Okay.
I have some background that gave me some knowledge and access to the communities that we work with.
Right. So a couple of things. Like, first, you said that you're not actively, I don't know if it's exactly word that you use, not advertise yourself. You're waiting to be asked to be engaged in a certain projects. But how? Like, who is asking you? Is it governments? Are these ranger groups who are managing wildlife parks, and then they have to hear about you somehow as well? So there has to be some level of kind of showing the flag going on, saying, hey, we're here, and in case you need us, you can reach out, right?
Yeah, I mean, our attitude, I mean, one, I like to say a lot of what I do is, development for future programs. I go over and find, build relationships, find needs. I like to say we do campfire development. There's a lot of things you only hear about when you've developed a relationship and, eventually sit around a braai fire with somebody and fully understand the need, right? And there's also the level of access we have in some of the places, the intimate relationships we have mean that we get to hear and understand needs that aren't otherwise advertised. So our goal, though, is to perform our programs with quality and let word of mouth invite us to other places. We have a social media and a website presence. We have great photography, great photographers we work with. But like I said, we have to be less than descriptive about where we are and what capabilities we're introducing. So yeah, I mean, word of mouth is the primary driver of our exposure to new project areas. I mean, look, we're in our infancy, hopefully in our infancy. So, we're still seeing growth, but we have found ourselves in some pretty unique positions. One of those is we were one of the first ever groups, certainly in our space, first certainly nonprofit to be asked to do implementing work through the U.S. Consulate General, the embassy there. Specifically, there was a need that hadn't been delivered on for 5 years with a national park in South Africa, Table Mountain, and we were able to implement fast rope training from helicopters for firefighters to protect that park. In that case, like we have developed a really good reputation relationship with the U.S. officials who are working over there out of various embassies, Fish and Wildlife, and they have really, they have real interest in helping out where they can, and for us to collaborate and be a group that can implement to them. And it's also important for us because we want to maintain a very good relationship with all entities because we are an outside group. Historically, there are other groups who have behaved badly or made mistakes that have gotten them outside the good graces of their hosts. And, to us, we have to do what we do both as a collaboration, respecting always that we're a guest wherever we go, but also, understanding that we are primarily a U.S. presence, that we do employ and work with Africans, but primarily our contractors or our security capable contractors are coming from the U.S. So, having the level of credibility that we have and enjoy right now is very important to us to maintain that and always respect the goals and if any restrictions of official U.S. presence, but certainly of the host countries, the national park systems. So the bottom line is quality of program, maturity, discretion, and honestly, humility, not thinking we're over there for ourselves and understanding we are a guest. And ultimately, we're not the ones risking our lives. And I think if you understand that position and understand that we're in support of the Rangers, that it helps you get in a place that allows you to grow new relationships and find new places to be of service.
Gotcha. So you're said, and I'm aware that you might not be able to answer all the questions. That's okay. But what I'm taking from you is so you're actually not, we're not risking your life. So you're actually not kind of military organization, like a private military organization that goes out and supply soldiers or boots on the ground. You're working mainly with Rangers who are actually already in that conflict, right? You use the term war or Rhino wars, which is essentially what it is, because that's a picture I have in my head that this is like a essentially full-blown armed conflict. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand that we do not engage. None of our guys are there to engage in any kind of law enforcement, security activity. That is not our role. It's not our interest. We are there to support, train, equip, and enable. Right? We find the Rangers who have a need that we can deliver on, and our goal is to improve, ensure their, to the degree that we are able, ensure their protection, their safety, and in their ability to do their job at an asymmetric level. Opposed
what
to
does it mean? You mentioned like a third time asymmetric level. I'm not. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So our goal in a program is, when I say asymmetry, what I mean is that they have a greater capability than the threat that they face, than the poaching group or whatever the nature of the poaching group they take on. So, and that's important because, like I said, we're not a one size fits all approach. So, in one area, they may face a certain level of threat. In another area, they may face a different level of threat. Our goal is not to get everybody to this level, but rather to get everybody just to an advantaged level over the threat that they face, based on the resources available to both of us, and our assessment of those needs. Our Rangers say, and we also, if our collaboration with Rangers is, and our training is effective, then there will be less conflict, because ultimately the goal should be getting what we say, ride a boom, deterrent, to level deterrence. That certainly is our mutual goal. We don't want anybody to be shot. We don't want anybody to get in a fight. If we can stop the fight before it's over, if we can allow the Rangers to dominate in such a way that no shot is fired either at a Ranger or an animal, that's the ultimate goal. It's very difficult to get there in some cases. Now, we are working in 2 locations right now, where, interestingly, people learned from how unaware or unprepared groups were for the surge of the Rhino War in the last decade. And we're introducing capabilities that aren't even necessarily needed yet, but we anticipate that because of either the introduction of Rhino to this area or growing trends, that they're going to face that. But that, hopefully, ideally puts them in a position to be proactive, not reactive, to be deterrent. And it's very difficult once, it's kind of, there's a viral nature from my perspective. Once poachers kind of get into an area or a syndicate gets in, it's very difficult to get them out because they're organic, they evolve, they learn. When they're on the inside, or they've corrupted, people, or engaged in some intelligence and fact finding. And once they're inside, it can become very difficult. You remain in a reactive place potentially for a very long time. So if we can work with groups, and there are those who really have the foresight and the advanced sort of progressive thinking to anticipate those threats and be prepared for them, that's fantastic, and we really want to be supportive of that. So so asymmetric is just making the best better, as we say.
Gotcha. Listen, and this is quite interesting. You mentioned working with local communities, and you also mentioned how syndicates or poachers are either through basic coercion or economic exploiting, essentially poor economic situation of local people, getting their foothold into certain areas. How I was just wondering whether better question would be, have you been confronted with such a situations, or what is the game plan in that? Because then essentially, from my naive, arguably perspective, it's hard to find, how to work with local community when the local community is, so to say, owned by the cartel. And what is going on in situations like that? Have you ever have to deal with this?
I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking. You mean, have we seen attempted corruption and recruitment, or?
Yeah, no. I'm asking, like, where you have a basically poor village, for argument's sake, right? And then those cartels move in, and they essentially recruiting or forcing those people to work for them, right? Either through threatening them or through paying the money. It seems like then it's a quite difficult situation. It's impossible almost, from my, like I say, a naive perspective, for you to come in and convince them, like, no, now you work with us, right? What's going on in those situations?
Yeah, well, I mean, no, okay. So yeah, you're right. I mean, look, rhino horn is the most valuable material on the planet when it hits the black market right now, right? And when that is literally on the other side of the fence from an impoverished community, or community facing, few economic opportunities, the recipe is very, very difficult to, very difficult to confront and resist. So, yeah, I mean, recruitment, I think I've heard fewer. I mean, there's intimidation to get involved in militias and terror groups, right? On the more sort of syndicate to kind of local community scenarios, I'm not aware of as many overt attempts to intimidate people into poaching. It's more, financial recruitment. And you're right. At the end of the day, economics drive everything, right? And that's. Yeah, I mean, there's very few. I mean, Elon Musk can move in and build 10 factories and employ, 500,000 people, right, in various places. Like there are, which China is actively doing, except they're not employing a lot of locals. So, economic opportunity and growth is probably one of the key things globally, but that's a nearly impossible thing in certain areas. So I think there are a few ways in which we have seen, positive movement. There's a group called Save the Waterberg Rhino, actually, in South Africa, that does some fantastic community outreach. And I know one of the things they do is they try to connect to communities the reality that the same pipeline and syndicates that move the trafficked parts that their son or brother or nephew may be engaged in poaching, those same pipelines traffic their daughters, bring drugs into their communities, weapons and other things. And so you get this, to hear them tell it. I don't have a lot of direct experience with this, but the women in those communities, if you get their buy-in, understanding that it's not simple economics, that there's an overall threat to the community, that they have a great deal of influence. One of our board of advisory members, Dr. Okori, he had it's a great success story in Malawi. He had there was a village where, with the new border definition of a park there, cut off some of their historic, inadvertently historic access to like a water supply where there was fishing and other things. So you were seeing a lot of incursions and a lot of poaching. It was mainly based on opportunity and food, but that started to progress into greater opportunity, bigger animals. So they came up with a program. It was a multi-year program where they put in fisheries, hatcheries. They put in beehives for honey. They built gardens. They just helped the community become self-sufficient. And I mean, they did extraordinary things, like they brought in chickens. So they found that there are these chickens in Australia, or at least an Australian bred line, that produced, I think, 3 times as many eggs as local chickens. Problem is, they didn't sit on their eggs. They're like a high producer, but low incubation interest. But they found that if they got the guinea fowl that were local and they put wax in their ears where they couldn't be called to their flock, they would sit on the egg. So they upped this. They had like a great egg production through this, so they did a lot of things like that. And ultimately they really stopped the incursions into the park and the attempts to, fish and hunt illegally. That's a great model and great success story to look at, to say, this is a way in which helping the community had a very positive impact. The more militant, syndicates, I mean, it's like a gang in any, really vicious gang in any big city, or certainly drug cartels, right? It's very hard to resist the attraction I would venture to say that there is certainly a peer pressure element, maybe that borders on intimidation, that I'm aware of. And a thing to understand too, I mean, we get messages all the time on Instagram, like, kill the poachers, can't wait to kill the poachers, poach the poachers, all this. I mean, we have instances where a ranger, who's, somebody very noble and focused, may have another family member who's poaching, and the reality is that poacher is bringing in, the person engaged in poaching is bringing in more money to his family than the ranger is, right? And so if you're talking about feeding the kids, the grandkids, I mean, from the family's perspective, one guy's doing it better. I don't think anybody, including myself, anybody is beyond being corrupted when you're in a position where, where it makes a difference in your life, that when you have great need. I think one of the things we've seen too is that we take it for granted, and this is actually where you can kind of have a really awesome overlap with the conversation with the hunting community, because we take it for granted that wildlife has value, right? The rhino has more value alive than dead, and that's not a sinister thought, it's just a reality, right? To most people who live in areas where there are rhino, if they've ever even seen one, which we have seen people who live 5 miles from parks with rhino and have been there 20 years and never seen one, right? Whereas we see it 2 hours or 2 days after we land, So this idea that these animals are wonderful and must be protected, that either that education or that awareness or just that respect, that value isn't there for a lot of the local communities. I mean, there are things that give wildlife value: tourism, hunting, farming, research grants, NGOs, all of these things give wildlife value, and they have to work together. Because at the end of the day, if you can't give wildlife value, whether perceived or actual, but more actual than perceived at the end of the day is what you need, then you're always going to be playing catch up and losing. And like right now, it costs more to buy a buffalo than an elephant, on the continent, right? Elephants are free. People are giving them away. There's nowhere to keep them. It's somebody reached out to me the other day. There were what was it, 47 elephants or something that were going to be culled. And they were, oh, this is horrible. How horrible is it? And I did some quick math, which I'm not doing now. I'm just referencing from memory. But I think, I thought to keep these elephants for 10 years, it was about 35 million US. You got to buy them, you got to feed them, you got to have land big enough for that many elephants. And that's a lot of land. You got to have security, protection. You got to employ people. Like, you got to manage the land, you got to manage the fences. Like, it's a wonderful idea, but who's going to take them, right? I mean, that's where big game hunting and other things come in, is because, from their perspective, well, we got to kill 47 elephants because they're destroying the land that we have for the other animals and the other elephants. So wouldn't it be better to fund our operations if a wealthy person from the West comes and shoots one? It's hard to argue with those economics, whether you are in favor of big game hunting or not. And then, of course, the non-big game hunting, the herd animal hunting, or other areas, I mean, the same metrics apply, right? That the value of that engagement goes to protect that land and give value. Now, we can talk in a second about it. There's some complications to that, especially right now, that economic formula. But look, this is a long digression from your simple question yet again. But the reality is economics are important. I think education from kids, especially, that these animals are something special. When we were doing more community work before By Grace, we did art and photography programs. So we'd bring famous photographers, excellent photographers and artists, and teach kids to paint and take pictures. They just look at animals differently, right? Will that deter them from being recruited to be engaged in wildlife trafficking? Hopefully, but at the end of the day, economics is economics, right? I think we have to be realistic about that. One thing I will say, and I don't want to give us too much credit here, so I want to be careful how boldly I state this, but I will say that some of the rangers we work with, we have built really good relationships. We're WhatsApping constantly. We see them on the ground. We brought some to the US. I would like to say that, when they have needs, they ask, even if it's something simple. Could you bring me this for my kid? Could you do this? Like, we have small programs and strong relationships, and we do everything we can in those regards, right? I would like to say that because of our relationships, there is less of a likelihood that those people would become discontented and, corrupted. And I don't say that because I think they're specifically more corruptible than anyone else, including myself, right? But I do know that, especially now, being a ranger, these guys, if you imagine like a park ranger in Yellowstone signing up, they're not signing up to put on a plate carrier and shoot anyone and get shot at by AK-47s. So thing one is that they're just facing a reality that I don't think, maybe now people head into that, but it's certainly not worth the risking of their life. Is not worth what they're paid.
I see the numbers, like how many rangers were killed, were shot. It's like you said, they're probably never thought they're gonna be signing up to this sort of.
And I mean, and at some point they got to say, I got kids at home. Is it worth dying for an animal? I've never had to answer that. I don't risk my life, right? I mean, some of the stuff we do can be dangerous, but I'm not like them, right? And so, you're also seeing, like, during COVID, we traveled during COVID. We were allowed to travel because we have diplomatic note for that, and it's awful. I mean, these guys are isolated. They have no means. There's no $1,400 check coming from the government for them. There's no, maybe no access to binge things on Netflix. Like, the isolation was real. The loss of income. They're not issued gas money. They can't get new boots. I mean, you're talking about what was already a difficult situation is now, they are disheartened. They are lonely. They are tired. They don't have any days off, these guys. And So, I mean, anything we can do to just make them feel like they're not alone. I think that's really important. I think we see it now in a way we didn't see it before.
Yeah, it's well put. Listen, I'm curious about your comments, or maybe you can expand a little bit on it, because you mentioned something that I was going to ask you about, that there people sending you these, kill the poachers, and we seen that that somewhere was messaged, a poacher were killed or eaten by a lion, and people cheering. And then usually people who know what's up, who've been on the ground, saying like, well, there's nothing to cheer for, because these people they sometimes have no choice. They're sometimes, it's not that clear cut. And then there is this discussion that often so-called militarization of conservation might result with this attitude, especially in the West, like, oh, it is okay to kill a poacher, right? There's a black and white, there's a poacher, it's okay to kill a poacher. And then this is, this is really, I'm not going to say it's labeled, but it is really kind of like a colonialist almost approach, right? They're like, oh, it's them, they're poachers, so go ahead and kill them. But then you mentioned, like, there's sometimes one family, and within that family there is a poacher and there is a ranger. And also sometimes the poachers are turned rangers because they have this knowledge, right, about animals, about tracking, about techniques used by poachers. So then they're excellent at being rangers, to be able to neutralize the techniques on poaching. So I'm curious your comments on that.
Well, look, first thing is this: life is life, right? We can't champion the life of wildlife, not champion the life of people, whether poachers or anybody. So I don't like the attitude that celebrates the death of poachers, because again, life is life. That's the business that we're in. Look, there can be, and obviously, if you're dealing with militias that are organized and can have a very different feeling than if you're dealing with people who are identifiably from a local community. Also, when your life is threatened, it's hard, it's hard to sort of see the humanity and think in those terms, right? That's a luxury. And sometimes there's a brutality to the poaching, or an indiscriminate nature to the poaching that just is hard. It's hard to give kind of, the benefit of humanity to some of these people. Like, I get it. It's very difficult, right, to see some of these things, but I think you can't forget that you're facing fellow humans, right? Like in any conflict. I mean, these are people. Life is life. Yeah, I mean, I think, there are countries that have a, law enforcement approach and arrest approach. There are other countries that have, a shoot on sight approach. There is a strong argument to be made that one ultimately ends with, more deterrence, that a more severe approach just means less conflict because there's a greater consequence. I'm not going to necessarily weigh in and say that I think one is better, but I do think we have to understand that, strong lethal measures can act as a deterrent that, an approach of law enforcement doesn't. So yeah, I mean, that's an ongoing conversation that you see. And, but at the end of the day, we are certainly not in the business of celebrating any level of conflict, any loss of life. We want these rangers bored, fat, happy, and then we would love the local communities to be the same. Like, we wish that they could appreciate wildlife on safari. It's not reasonable to anticipate that the conflict will stop anytime soon, of course, but when you say the militarization, we don't prefer it. I mean, our contractors, like the guys who work with Edge, the guys we've brought over there, they have seen a lot of conflict, a lot of shooting, a lot of killing. None of them want more of that, right? They've seen the value of them. They've seen what worked and they saw what didn't work. They have worked in different environments facing similar problems and threats, and I guarantee you not a single person we work with would get excited or at all warm to the idea of, themselves or anybody else engaging in any kind of combatant, combat conflict or anything else. It's just not what we like. But when it happens, we want the rangers we work with to be safe.
Right. And this is true, providing them training and potentially equipment and tactics and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, Nathan, when we're gonna be wrapping that up slowly, but I have another question for you with relation. Like, can you give us a view on the political context of that conservation, especially like you mentioned China, and obviously China is moving into Africa, right? I even heard that they buying out the Africa. So how does, do you see that as an obstacle that because without a doubt you're being perceived, but these are the Americans coming in here, and there's a tension. I'm guessing there's a tension. Like, how you mitigating that? Or is it significant problem for you? Like, if given because on the other hand, the governments of those countries, they, it seems like this is something that the governments also should take a note and make some decisions, whether with relation to, laws or anything else, or even allocation of military resources, if it comes to that, right? So this is very complex situation, I think, not only from a perspective, operational on the ground perspective, like, you're dealing with a cartel and you need to know, but there's also like a bigger forces at play, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to wade too deeply into, talking geopolitics. I'm certainly don't consider myself qualified to speak with any authority on it. I will say, when it comes to China and countries in Asia who engage in, are the main destination for trafficked wildlife parts, you're dealing with deeply, deeply rooted traditions of these medicinal cures or, folkloric remedial use of wildlife parts. You're also dealing with some serious economics. What level of corruption may exist in a place that, that makes for resistance to resisting, the trafficking of wildlife parts. I can't say. I mean, it's undoubtedly there. I think there's other considerations like, look, China even last year, the year before, announced that they were going to legalize the import of elephant, rhino horn, elephant ivory, and some other things.
Some would argue that this might be a good move because then you will be able to put more control over it versus black market, right? You surely heard those points of view.
Yeah, I look, personally, I don't give a lot of credence that that's going to be well exercised, but you're right. I mean, it's like I said, I don't have expertise in this matter. A lot of what I hear is just sort of downhill. As far as what we face, I mean, certainly there are local attitudes in places who, not necessarily wrongly or not necessarily with the wrong instincts, say, we don't need your help. You're an outside group. Some of that is because other groups have behaved badly and not been respectful. Some of that is because, these guys are entrenched and they say, this is our fight. We got it, and I think, if I'm in a position to make the case to anybody, one, we want to be humble and respectful. And like I said, if we're not welcome, if we don't feel like this is a place where we can be additive and have a good relationship, then we're not going to try to elbow our way in. But my perspective is, this may be their fight, but if the rhino is lost, it's not lost to them. It's lost to all of us. Right. I mean, that's so, I do have an obligation to, if I'm in a position to do something about this cause, I have an obligation to do something because, one, the rhino has a right to life. And two, because, it's a global loss and it's not just a global loss, it's a future loss. It's a loss for my kids and their kids. I mean, the greatest days of my life in some respects have been spent, or the greatest adventures of my life have been spent in Africa because of these animals. And I would absolutely love to preserve that in any small, hopefully very effective, hopefully meaningful way that I can personally, that we as an organization can. So that's my instinct. I can tell you the other people involved in EcoDefense Group, they share that attitude. I think our contractors, once they get over, they understand, they build a relationship. They just want to make a difference. And I think it's important to know the difference between whether you're there to make a difference or whether you're there because you want to be there, right? Again, it goes to the point of, are we doing something no one else can do? Are we invited? And I'll say that the day we're not needed, or we don't find a need for, what we can offer, is the day I go back on safari. I get to do very little of that there, but I do absolutely love the places we are. So yeah, fortunately, I would say that while sometimes there's bureaucracy, resistance, political attitudes, for the most part, we enjoy awesome relationships, friendships, and really have a community in the places where we work. So I think that we feel very welcome, and we would do anything for the people that we're with, because I'm here talking to you. I'm waking up this morning, making my coffee. I'm hoping I don't get a WhatsApp that something has happened to a guy we work with, right? I mean, it's every day there's a threat to their life. So if I can wake up at 4 a.m. today, focus on fundraising, do what I can to support our programs, get over there and give them a better year, give them a new capability, then that's my drive. And I think that the people who want to have that collaboration, we're there to have a collaboration with. So so that might be a little bit histrionic, but we get passionate. But if you can use that passion as the rear wheel of the bicycle to drive you focused forward, then all the better.
Yeah. I heard this on quite a few occasions, especially recently. A lot of discussion about trophy hunting and the bans of trophy import on various in various jurisdictions. I know that California is one. UK is considering that as well, and quite often the view is like, back off, let the local communities manage their resources. They're being the guardians of their resources for ages, and this is, let them do what they think is best for you. Being very close to that, is that the majority of what you would observe, that those local communities are, doing good job at managing their resources if they only, allowed to? Or do you think that on some occasions they might need, let's say, guidance, or, like, where you sit at the idea, like, just back off, let them do what they should do. It's their rhino, their stuff, and so on.
I think it's important, vital, to have an attitude of respect and, an understanding that you're a guest, right? That is from the perspective of people coming from the West or coming from outside of what area we're working in. I think there's a difference between saying, could they do it if left to their own devices? We're meddling. I think there's a difference between being under-resourced and under-prepared and being dedicated. There's a lot of people who are incredibly dedicated, but there's only so much you can do when, again, the people, the amount of money that comes in from rhino horn, for example. I mean, it's like, it's hard for any budget to accommodate that, right? And again, it's like nobody could have looked down the line a few decades ago and anticipated, the level of conflict that would surround wildlife, I think. So, yeah, I mean, so I don't think the line of thinking of, they just need to be left to their own devices, we shouldn't meddle, is I think it is applicable. I think it's under-resourced, and can we support their best efforts? That's why we like to say we make the best better. We're not trying to say we create the best, or we come in and we, are the best or something. We just want to make them better. We want to do what we can to support. You can certainly get into the conversation, and this will allow me to foray into giving a shout out to one of our favorite people. You can certainly recognize that in places, outside influence that has, for example, pressured governments or parks to ban hunting or to ban certain other practices, have had, in some cases, detrimental effects, right? And there are circumstances where countries will, be persuaded to enact bans or do something like that because they don't want to turn away money, or they don't want to turn away outside people showing up to help who have, great clout and resources. You don't want to say, no, sorry, I can't, but there are instances where outside groups come in and try to impose their principles, views, and their sensibilities. You do hear about that a great deal. There are examples. I'll be careful not to get too detailed into some of those because you do start to wade into real politics. But you do see that, right? And you see that, like, we're not big enough to, to have that kind of influence if we wanted to. So I don't think there's a danger of us kind of influencing policy in that way, or standard practices or anything. But there are groups and there are governments that, if you, for example, put a ban on the export of certain hunting trophies, that's going to have an economic effect to areas engaged in wildlife conservation, right? So whether it's well-meaning, or whether you agree with the institution of restrictions like that, or regulations, you have to recognize the economic impact it's going to have. And I think the hunting is where you see that most obvious, the most obvious introduction, at least to me, introduction of regulations that hinder or hurt revenue that goes to conservation. Now, part of the reason we're talking today, and this is something I wanted to bring up, well, the main reason we're talking is because the wonderful Rachel Carey, who has been just a great supporter, coming to the mix recently, and we love a great deal. She was previously a guest on your show, and she recommended we speak. But the conversation with her has been really informative and healthy. I think she recognizes, and this is the pitch I've been making to some Safari Club International, other groups I've had the opportunity to speak to, which is you're going to see that there's going to be less direct money from hunting in Africa going to conservation, because they've been hurt by the shutdown badly as well, right? Revenue is just stopped all over. You're seeing culls of animals that would have been hunted last year. I mean, it's tragic. There's still hunting groups who want to go over, but find flights too restrictive, or the COVID testing. I mean, it's a nightmare to travel, right? Not from the perspective of the empty seats on a plane, but I mean, getting a COVID test that you have to have 72 hours before you land, and you've got 3 layovers, these things make a lot of people, plus the situation on the ground, rising crime in certain areas, have had an impact on commercial hunting and other things. So part of the case I'd like to make privately, and to a degree publicly, I don't put my face out there very much. Is that I think we would like to see, based on the intelligence and the experience we're having, a really good conversation going on with the hunting community and with other interested conservation parties about becoming more invested intellectually, like learning more, finding more direct ways to contribute. If you're going over to have a safari, to have a hunting safari, whatever it is, we invite you to, whether with us or someone else, just take some time to really gain more insight into the situation, because we're at a point where the effects of COVID and the COVID shutdown are just having such a detrimental impact that we've got to encourage more involvement. And Rachel has exactly those instincts, right? That's why she reached out to us. She said, look, I want to be proactive. I don't want to be talk about this. I want to reach out. I want to learn more. She just wanted to learn everything, soak it up. She wants to, we've invited her. We hope she travels with us so that she can be proactive, and the resources, connections that she has. And I hope she doesn't mind me speaking for her here, but I think, she should be, her instincts here are just really laudable. And I think something we'd like to see, a whole lot more of, the opportunity to have a conversation, learn more on the ground, and just find ways to connect. It doesn't mean you have to become a significant donor to us or someone else. We would love it. We rely on private relationships and donations to do what we do. And we would love to bring people like her, other interested people into the mix. But just to say, this is something I care about, I'm interested in, whether it's Africa or here. But certainly they face a very dire threat and real need. So I'm going to take time to learn, understand more, and understand that I might be in a position to bring a solution to a problem that they have, or bring some support that otherwise I didn't realize. So yeah, we just, there's nothing negative to say about any of the support that any of these communities are giving right now, but I would just like to encourage, the growth of the conversation, a little more intimacy. And if we can aid in that, whether for our benefit or, directly, or just directly the benefit of people we work with, that's why I'm talking to you today. I'd like to find ways to reach out to people, because we see it, and it's not the time to sort of just hope. We got to be active. It's pretty dire.
Yeah, that's a great message, Nathan. And so maybe now it's a great time to tell us, or anybody who listens or watching this, like how to support you, how to support your group. What's the best way?
So yeah, I mean, there's really three ways. And I'll say this here's the really unfortunate news. And this is, I brought a donor over, a really interested party in February, who spent some time with us. And, one of the things that's being said privately in places is that the wild rhino has 8 years left. It's not being said publicly. Now, engaging in that kind of talk is really tricky, because you hear it, the planet has 12 years left, 8 years left, we're all going to be underwater by July 2019. Or, it's like groups throw out hyperbole so much that when you hear a statistic like that, it almost glances off at you. Well, we saw it. We saw 15 rhino killed in a week when we were there in one place. I mean, it's just unreal. So that metric of 8 years left, it could be very real. And, she came away, and I wrote a piece where I kind of said some of this, and Field Ethos, who have been awesome supporters to us and reached out and asked me to pin a piece for them stating this. She said, look, it just feels hopeless, right? It just feels hopeless. I mean, that was her takeaway after spending a couple of weeks. I mean, she and her husband had an awesome time. I mean, they saw incredible things because I was next to them. I saw incredible things. But she said, it just feels hopeless. And that the next day, we had the opportunity to stand in front of 12, I think, Rangers who are in a special ops team that we've trained and work with intimately. And I said, you know what? It felt hopeless to Sparta, right? There are people who are literally willing to go without sleep and put their lives on the line for this. So the hope that I see is the ability to give them the best capabilities we can, right? What does that look like in 8 years? I don't think we can plot a course to saving the rhino really, really clearly, but I do think that it's not hopeless so long as there are people willing to give everything, right? I'm giving everything I can, time, every effort, burning through my phone battery every day, whatever it takes for me to give a contribution. If I can inspire someone else, if Rachel comes to the table, someone else, I mean, we are going to see a difference. We are introducing capabilities. This is the case I make for us that have never been introduced before, so let's have hope in that. Let's have hope that the best we're making better, can make a difference, can turn a tide, can stop an army coming through the gates, right? It's not quite that obvious and simple, but I do think there is cause for hope based on the people who are willing to do what the guys we work with do. So if you want to get behind that, which I really hope that people do come into the mix, understand one, we rely as a group, we're very small, we're very strategic, and we can't do really wide appeals easily, because if we say we've trained guys in night vision in this place, well, now the poachers and everybody else knows those capabilities are there. We have to be discreet, and that makes fundraising difficult for us. So we will expose a lot of what we do privately. We rely on those relationships, people to come into the mix and kind of join our family in that way. So, you can go to our website, you can learn more, you can reach out to us and start a dialogue in the way that you have. We encourage all of that. I'll always take any call, any email, anytime I can. On our site, you can make a donation. We can send you decks that show you, here's what you're investing in. We treat our donors as investors. You're investing in us and the work we're going to do. We will work hard for every dollar given to us, every dollar, every pound given to us. You're also investing in the future of wildlife. We believe that, right? And that is a true investment, right? It makes a difference in the global economy, makes a difference in the world. So we treat our donors as investors. You can go on our website, you can look, you can reach out, you can donate, you can make a monthly donation. You can buy some of our awesome shirts in our shop, thanks to Cry Precision and Multicam. We have some sweet shirts. You can spread our word on social media, you can push us, and you can think about relationships you might have and make introductions. We rely on that. We absolutely rely on that. So yeah, if somebody's in a position to do any of that, it could be that one listener to your show could either directly or indirectly solve our entire year. Those relationships and those interests are out there. And to that person, we say, get on a plane with us, throw some night vision on, get in the helicopter, like come experience on the front lines something that no tourist could buy. We'd love to show you what we do.
Right. Fantastic message. Nathan, how do you see yourself, the future of both your organization and wildlife conservation, rhinos and pangolins and the whole deal? Like in general, how do you see this? And I well understand that you said it's hard to say, it's all these things, but like your hunch.
Well, look, I will say this. I think it was clearer to see a hopeful future before COVID. The idea of shutdown and social distancing was certainly a first world luxury, if I dare say that, right?
Yeah.
The cost to some of these countries has been pretty detrimental. So I think it's a lot cloudier for me based on these effects. Whether some good will come out of that long term based on recognition of need, it's hard to see right now. So I don't like to be unhopeful. I can be more hopeful about our organization moving forward. We've grown every year. We're not a group that's going to grow massive. That's just not our nature. We're looking to take on about 3 projects a year. We're engaged in a project right now to introduce a canine unit, the first ever of its kind in this country. Dogs coming from Holland. It's been a massive undertaking for us. It's the biggest thing we've done. Involves a lot of other training and pieces. And I think we're going to stand on great success with that. I think we're introducing that capability in a place, like I said before, where the poaching hasn't become as dramatic or rampant. And we hope that, this protects them from that, and that we will continue to invest in this location and some of the others. So I do see us growing. I see us have more stability from donors, people we've brought to the table. We do what we do because of donations. I mean, it's that simple. I see us being effective, multinational. I would like to see us maybe taking on a couple more projects a year, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 in the next, in about a 5-year metric. But we are all about small, high quality executions, or relatively small, right? Or I should say, rather than small, I should say limited scope. Full identifying an end state and executing that, and we've gotten very good, at that model. So for us, I would like to see us very busy, effective. I'd like to see growth in relationships, and I'd like to see more collaborations with people who recognize that we can, offer something to what they already do very well. What does the future look like in wildlife conservation? I don't know. I would prefer it to be less militaristic, of course. But I would say that so long as there is a threat that is armed and willing to fight, let's make the wildlife protectors as badass as possible. And I can look forward to that being a part of conservation.
Nathan, thank you very much. You're doing, guys, great jobs. I wish you all the best in the future, and I wish you great success in what you do, and empowering those local communities, those local rangers, making them safer, making the animals safer. People will be able to find the links to your social media and your website on the description of the show. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, man. Thanks for what you do.